Great Lakes Prepping here. In today's video, we're making one of the most beautiful things that mankind has ever concocted. That's right, bacon. There's nothing quite so tasty and satisfying as a big old slab of bacon that you've made yourself completely from scratch. And while there's a couple things that you absolutely must do a certain way, the process of making and curing bacon isn't really all that complicated. Most of the time is spent just waiting. So we're going to go through all the steps to turn an ordinary pork belly into strips of beautiful succulent bacon. Two quick notes before we start. One, this is a very basic dry cure recipe. I've taken out all the bells and whistles, and in this video we're just doing a basic slab of bacon that shows darn near the bare minimum that you need to do to create an edible and delicious bacon. I'm sure I'll do some different recipes and flavors in future videos, but for this one, it's just the basic recipe. And two, we're finishing the bacon making process today in the oven. It's very common for bacon to be smoked after curing, but it absolutely doesn't have to be. You can use your regular oven for the final step. That's exactly what we're going to do today. Now that that's out of the way, it's time to bring home the bacon. As always, let's take a look at our ingredients. Like I said, this is a very basic recipe for some good old savory bacon. First, we of course have a pork belly. You can buy a pork belly from pretty much any butcher. You may not find them at, say, your chain grocery store's meat counter, but go to any real meat shop and they'll have what you need. They'll ask how much you want and you'll just tell them a weight. I usually say around 3 pounds because that's a good chunk of bacon meat for me to work with. The pork belly here is just under 3.5 pounds. Next, we have kosher salt. You can use salt that's labeled pickling salt, cheese salt, kosher salt. Just don't use iodized table salt. Next is our curing salt. This is the pink granulated stuff. Pink curing salt, also known as Prague Powder No. 1, is a sodium nitrate based ingredient that is essential to the curing process. Please note that this is absolutely not the same thing as Himalayan pink salt. Then we have some brown sugar and black pepper. Now let's talk a little more about the pork belly. When you get a pork belly, it may or may not have had the skin already removed. Some butcher shops will give it to you however you like, skin on or skin off. If the skin is on, you will have to remove it. You can either do this first or you can do it last. A lot of people prefer to do it after curing and cooking because it comes off much easier. My pork belly has already had the skin removed, so I don't need to worry about it. If you have the option, I definitely recommend buying it with the skin already removed. So let's get into the curing process. This is one of the very important parts that you have to pay attention to when curing meats. It's essential to use the correct proportions of the pink curing salt and the kosher salt. Make sure you don't screw around with these measurements. Safely curing meats is a science, not an art. Particularly with the sodium nitrate, you have to use enough for a proper cure, but using too much can make you sick. And because granules of things like salt and curing salt can vary in size, we can't rely on a measuring spoon. Also, measuring spoon sizes aren't perfectly exact from one brand to the next, and we need to get a very precise measurement for our salts. So the only proper way to do it is by weight. But because we have to measure to an accuracy of 1/100th of a gram, an ordinary kitchen or postage scale isn't good enough. You'll need to get yourself a cheap, high-precision scale. I got this compact scale that measures down to 0.01 gram for about $13. I'll put a link to it in the video description. So, how much salt and curing salt do we need? Here's the rule of thumb for curing salt. 0.25% of the total weight of the meat. So, if you have a 5-pound pork belly, 5 pounds equals 2,268 grams. 2,268 times 0.0025 equals 5.67 grams. And the rule of thumb for the kosher salt is 2.25% of the total weight of the meat. So that hypothetical 5-pound pork belly would need 51.03 grams of that salt. The pork belly I have here is exactly 3.485 pounds. So that means we need 3.95 grams of curing salt and 39.52 grams of kosher salt. And if you don't like doing math, there are curing calculators online that do all the work for you. Just enter the weight of your pork belly and it tells you the exact measurements to use. I'll include a link to the curing calculator that I like to use in the video description. The only other ingredients we're adding to the cure is brown sugar and black pepper. These measurements don't have to be exactly precise like the curing ingredients because these are considered flavoring ingredients. My recipe uses 1/4 cup dark brown sugar and 1.5 tablespoons of black pepper. Mix all the curing and flavoring ingredients thoroughly, very thoroughly. Next, we need to entirely coat the pork belly on all sides, doing our best to use every last bit of the cure mix. Do your best to get all the crumbs and specks off of your cutting board and get them onto that pork belly. Like I said, we don't want to screw around with those carefully measured proportions. Now we're going to seal the whole thing very well in plastic wrap. Use as many layers as you need to totally wrap that thing up. I like to put my wrapped pork belly into a baking dish just on the off chance that any juice could possibly seep out of my plastic wrap. Now just stick it into the fridge for 7 to 10 days. You have to let it cure for at least 7 days. Basically, it needs 7 full days, but you can go a little longer than 7 days, just not shorter. And when you're halfway there, that's after 3 or 4 days, turn the wrapped meat over. After 7 full days, the curing is finished. At this point, we want to remove any excess salts off of the pork belly. Rinse the whole thing thoroughly with cool water and then pat completely dry with paper towels. I mentioned earlier that we're finishing this in the oven. If you prefer to use your smoker, you can almost follow the same instructions as I'm about to give for the oven. It's all about that internal temperature. Put the pork belly into a baking dish or onto a baking sheet and preheat the oven to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Cook until the internal temperature at its thickest part is 155 degrees Fahrenheit. This will take a while. For my 3.4 pound pork belly, it was around 3 hours. You absolutely should use a meat thermometer to make sure that the internal temperature is 155 degrees. Don't screw around with undercooked pork, even if it was cured. And if you don't have one, get yourself a cheap meat thermometer. I'll put a link to the one I use in the video description. At this point, your big hunk of meat is now officially bacon. If your pork belly still had skin on it, this would be the time to peel it off. We don't need to worry about that with this pork belly, but there is one more frustrating step to do before digging in. Wait some more. After you remove it from the oven, place it on the counter and allow it to cool for a little while, a couple hours. Then wrap it up again and put it in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours. You want your bacon cold because it's much easier to slice into strips than if it were still warm and soft. And that's it. Cut a bit off the end so you can start with a nice smooth strip. Slice as thick or as thin as you want. And by the way, don't get rid of those funky end pieces. Chop them up, give them a fry, and throw onto a salad, baked potato, or anything else that calls for bits of bacon. In my opinion, nothing beats frying strips of bacon in a cast iron skillet, but cook it however you prefer. Fried, baked, soft and tender, crispy and charred, whatever. Being that this meat is cured, it can technically last several days without being refrigerated. But I happen to have a refrigerator, and I feel much more comfortable keeping my bacon in there, as I'm sure most people these days would. The USDA recommends using your slab of dry cured bacon within about 3 weeks if refrigerated, and that works just fine for me. So that's it for now. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future meat videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is Great Lakes Prepping.